Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm just getting set up here. You can ponder the quote that you see above saying the communists base themselves on rich historical experience, which teaches that obsolete classes do not voluntarily abandon the stage of history. So if you can guess, throw your guesses up on who said that. If you Google, I don't really care, but, try to have fun with it. We're going to tell you the answer. You don't necessarily have to Google right now. Hello, Aria. Hello, everybody coming in. I'm just going to give you guys a couple of minutes. We're a minute ahead of time. I'm going to bring my co-host up shortly. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to answer who said that. It'll be a fun one. Maybe. No, it'll be fun. We're gonna have a good time. So, hey Wombo, how you doing? Who do you think said the communists base themselves on rich historical experience, which teaches that obsolete classes do not voluntarily abandon the stage of history? Who do you think said that? I want some guesses, people. Throw out a guess. Anyone? Who are we going to talk about today? All right. So I think the co-host is here. So I'll give you guys one more minute because no one's even doing any answers. Who said, no, that is not Mickey Mouse. The communists base themselves on rich historical experience, which teaches that obsolete classes do not voluntarily abandon the stage of history. The Rescue Rangers. Okay, Batman. Lenin. Okay. At least Wombo's going to play right. All right. Batman of a sort, if you think about it. We got a Stalin. Any other guesses before I bring our co-host up and he tells you who said it? One sec. Wait. He even had a joke? All right. I'm bringing up my co-host today. And that's Cruz from the Central Committee. Yay! Oh, he's going to be on camera, and I'm not going to be on camera. Sorry, I should have put the little box in there. Yes. So, Cruz.
Hello.
Can you tell us who said the communists base themselves on rich historical experience, which teaches that obsolete classes do not voluntarily abandon the stage of history? Who said that?
Joseph Zugashvili.
Oh, yes. He's our favorite. You guys all know him, right? You guys?
Absolute favorite. Based man.
Very, very based. The man of steel himself, Joseph Stalin.
The original Man of Steel. The true Man of Steel.
The true Man of Steel, not Superman. Definitely not Batman. It was Stalin that said this. So, anywho, all right. So, what we're going to do first is we're going to give you context around that. That's not a usual quote that people use all the time with him. So, it comes from a interview he did with H.G. Wells after H.G. Wells interviewed FDR. And H.G. Wells was trying to answer Marxism versus liberalism. So I'm going to read the part of Wells because I picked the short straw. And Cruz is going to be Stalin, and we're just going to read a little piece from it. Okay. I watch communist propaganda in the West, and it seems to me, he kind of has I can't do his voice. He has kind of a little, I don't know. I watch communist
You can't do
propaganda.
the War of the Worlds voice, you know?
I can't do it. I watch communist propaganda in the West, and it seems to me that in modern conditions, this propaganda sounds very old-fashioned because it is insurrectionary propaganda in favor of a violent overthrow of the social system was all very well when it was directed against tyranny. But under modern conditions, when the system is collapsing anyhow, stress should be laid on efficiency, on competence, on productiveness, and not on insurrection. It seems to me that the insurrectionary note is obsolete. The communist propaganda in the West is a nuisance to constructed-minded people.
Okay, and now for the part of Stalin. Of course, the old system is breaking down and decaying. That is true. But it is also true that new efforts are being made by other methods, by every means to protect, to save this dying system. You draw a wrong conclusion from a correct postulate. You rightly state that the old world is breaking down, but you are wrong in thinking that it is breaking down of its own accord. No, the substitution of one social system for another is a complicated and long revolutionary process. It is not simply a spontaneous process, but a struggle. It is a process connected with the clash of classes. Capitalism is dying, but it must not be compared simply with a tree which has decayed to an extent that it must fall to the ground of its own accord. No, revolution, the substitution of one social system for another, has always been a struggle, a painful and cruel struggle. A life and death struggle. And every time the people of the New World came into power, they had to defend themselves against attempts of the Old World to restore the old power by force. These people of the New Old World, these people of the New World always had to be on high alert, always had to be ready to repel the attacks of the Old World upon the new system. Yes, you are right when you say that the old social system is breaking down, but it is not breaking down of its own accord. Take fascism, for example. Fascism is a reactionary force which is trying to preserve the old system by means of violence. What will you do with the fascists? Argue with them? Try to convince them? But this will have no effect upon them at all. Communists do not in the least idealize the methods of violence. But they, the communists, do not want to be taken by surprise. They cannot count on the old world voluntarily departing from the stage. They see that the old system is violently defending itself. And that is why the communists say to the working class, answer violence with violence. Do all you can to prevent the old dying order from crushing you. Do not permit it to put manacles on your hands, on the hands with which you will overthrow the old system. As you see, the communists regard the substitution of one social system for another, not simply as a spontaneous and peaceful process, but as a complicated, long, and violent process. Communists cannot ignore this fact.
But look at what is now going on in the capitalist world. The collapse is not a simple one. It is the outbreak of reactionary violence, which is degenerating to gangsterism. And it seems to me that when it comes to a conflict with reactionary and unintelligent violence, socialists can appeal to the law, and instead of regarding the police as an enemy, they should support them in the fight against the reactionaries. I think that it is useless operating with the method of the old insurrectionary socialism.
The communists base themselves on rich historical experience which teaches that obsolete classes do not violently abandon the stage of history. Recall the history of England in the 17th century. Did not many say the old system had decayed, but did it not, nevertheless, require a Cromwell to crush it by force?
All right, so then he goes on. So Wells, basically, I just want to mention, he's from the Canadian. Huh?
I said it's a great interview because you get a lot of stuff from Stalin there.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, everyone should go back and probably read this interview. It's up on Marxist.org if you want to look it up. It's called Marxism versus Liberalism, Wells and Stalin together. So Wells himself was part of the Fabian Society where Orwell comes from. So yeah, they had this weird view about, Stalin and all that. So, as we do that, and Wells's answer to this was that Cromwell acted on the basis of constitution. So he's fine with state violence, basically, but
not resistant.
Yeah, not resisting the state violence is basically what comes down on that. So, I just wanted to read that little bit because, because we were using that quote. So, all right. So we're going to kind of like talk about the achievements he did, and then we're going to look at some critiques later on, and give some answers to those critiques and stuff like this. So. The first thing that we wanted to look at was dialectical materialism. I'm just going to read the intro for you guys, or part of the intro. I don't know if I'll read the whole. It's only a few paragraphs. Okay. Dialectical materialism is the world outlook of the Marxist-Leninist Party. It is called dialectical materialism because its approach to the phenomena of nature, its method of studying and apprehending them, is dialectical, while the interpretation of the phenomena of nature, its conception of these phenomena, its theory is materialistic. So historical materialism is the extension of the principles of dialectical materialism to the study of social life, an application of the principles of dialectical materialism to the phenomena of the life of society, to the study of society and of its history. And then he'll go on and describe the dialectical method and then historical method. So this is probably one of his most important pieces to read. This was written in 1938, after he's been in leadership for a while. So why is this important, Cruz? Why is this piece important?
So one, it really goes, it really simplifies for the most part, especially for when I was first starting out and reading Marxist theory, because Marx talks about, all of this stuff, but it goes on and on and on and on in great detail. Engels does the same thing. This particular piece is only about 25 pages long.
Yeah, it's not long.
And explains it just as well, makes it much more digestible. So and then really separates it from Hegel's idea of dialectics, explains how Marx took from that and built upon this dialectics, and then how Lenin continued that up to him in actually putting it into praxis. Yeah.
And historically, so the term dialectical materialism was already in use, correct?
It had been kind of mentioned before, but it didn't enter it wasn't a popular thing. People didn't regularly refer to it until about this piece. Yeah. So he really took it and explained it, much better than trying to get it all from reading all Marx and Engels and stuff like that. He in this one piece kind of puts it out for everyone, so it makes it a lot easier to understand and stuff like that. So So that is one of his achievements, was putting this out and helping people understand the dialectical materialists, the scientific method that Marx was using to look at the world. I find dialectical, I talk about this, and I'm ever trying to figure out a way to describe it to people really easy. A lot of people tend to use it at times, and they don't even know that they're using it, or a lot of people just don't go logical with stuff. They'll just go with feeling or with realism.
Yeah. So, it's very important to understand, because it is, and it's helped me, and it doesn't just help me in understanding theory, it's helped me in my life, understanding how to do this, how to look at the world in that way. I've used it in just personal stuff that just sat back and didn't react and actually looked at everything and, came to what I needed to do for that. So, I mean, it's an important thing to understand how to do.
It's one of so like I was reading recently. I had no theory or anything like that. I was just reading a book on like strange solutions nature had come up with, and sort of this evolutionary arms race that takes place right between predator and prey. And as I was reading it, there was a lot of moments where I was like, oh, this is dialectics. This is what they're talking about when they say this is just nature. Like, and they're just applying nature to social development.
Yeah.
And once that clicks for you, you're like, it's everything. this is how the world works. I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just the way of looking at things and kind of coming to the truth of things, I guess. So the next piece that we wanted to talk about, Cruz is going to read from the Foundations of Leninism.
Yeah, so I'm going to read just kind of a little bit from the third section of the Foundations of Leninism. And one thing that's important about the Foundations of Leninism, for those that aren't really familiar, is that Leninism wasn't really a thing until after Lenin passed. Like, no one kind of really referred to it. This is also another first. And the development of Leninism came from Stalin. And a lot of people in turn called it Stalinism, the critics would just, it's Stalinism. It's not. It's just he was defining Leninism and applying Leninism.
Yes.
As a distinction from, specifically as a distinction from the Second International, who had been like basically social democrats. So he says there are three questions. A, the importance of theory for the proletarian movement. B, criticism of the theory of spontaneity. And C, the theory of the proletarian movement. And this is a very long passage, so I'm only going to read a section from each of these, just for the sake of time, and so you don't have to listen to me yap for too long on the one thing. So one, the importance of theory. Some think that Leninism is the precedence of practice over theory in the sense that its main point is the translation of the Marxist thesis into deeds, their execution. As for theory, it is alleged that Leninism is rather unconcerned about it. We know that Plekhanov, time and again chaffed Lenin about his unconcern for theory, and particularly for philosophy. We also know that theory is not held in great favor by many present-day Leninist practical workers, particularly in view of the immense amount of practical work imposed upon them by the situation. I must declare that this more than odd opinion about Lenin and Leninism is quite wrong and bears no relation whatever to the truth. That the attempt of practical workers to brush theory aside runs counter to the whole spirit of Leninism and is fraught with serious dangers to the work. Mm-hmm. Theory is the experience of the working class movement in all countries taken in its general aspect. Of course, theory becomes purposeless if it is not connected with revolutionary practice. Just as practice gropes in the dark if its path is not illuminated by revolutionary theory. But theory can become a tremendous force in the working class movement if it is built up in indissoluble connection with revolutionary practice. For theory and theory alone can give the movement confidence, the power of orientation, and an understanding of the inner relation of surrounding events. For it and it alone can help practice to realize not only how and in which direction classes are moving at the present time, but also how and in which direction they will move in the near future. None other than Lenin uttered and repeated scores of times to the well-known thesis that without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And to kind of step away from it for a second, there's the other quote, I believe it's Fred Hampton, where he's like, theory without practice, I can't remember the exact phrasing he used, but he basically said it's shit,
Yeah.
It's great and all, but without practice, it's shit.
Yeah, because it's like you have a plan. Then there's a plan, because then you're going to get into the second point.
Yeah. So, part 2. Criticism of the theory of spontaneity, or the role of the vanguard in the movement. The theory of spontaneity is a theory of opportunism, a theory of worshiping the spontaneity of the labor movement, a theory which actually repudiates the leading role of the vanguard of the working class, of the party of the working class. The theory of worshiping spontaneity is decidedly opposed to the revolutionary character of the working class movement. It is opposed to the movement taking the line of struggle against the foundations of capitalism. It is in favor of the movement proceeding exclusively along the line of realizable demands acceptable to capitalism. It is wholly in favor of the line of least resistance. The theory of spontaneity is the ideology of trade unionism. The theory of worshiping spontaneity is decidedly opposed to giving the spontaneous movement a politically conscious, planned character. It is opposed to the party marching at the head of the working class, to the party raising the masses to the level of political consciousness, to the party leading the movement. It is in favor of the politically conscious elements of movement, not hindering the movement from taking its own course. It is in favor of the party only heeding the spontaneous movement and dragging at the tail of it. The theory of spontaneity is the theory of belittling the role of conscious element of the movement. Idea of Vostism. I've never heard that word before.
Vostism. Yeah.
So I've never actually heard that one said, so forgive me for that. The logical basis of all opportunism. So we see that today, right?
Definitely.
Constantly. Every time there's any kind of protest, any kind of slight movement, people are like, this is it. This is the revolution. This is when everything changes.
Yeah.
But without any kind of vanguard, no tip to the spear, no captain of the ship, nothing really happens. You're just asking for a piece of the pie rather than taking the pie.
Yeah, yeah. And I'd like to also say spontaneity in here. You can put reactionary. Mm-hmm. It's interchangeable in this. So, you're talking about, basing on theory to reactionary. And then without having the vanguard leading, you don't know what's going to happen because you don't have the theory base, because you're just having all these workers who don't really know the theory, just thinking, hey, if I do this or I do that, it won't lead to what they want. It won't lead to a good revolution. It will just lead to a mess if it's not somewhat, or more or less organized by the party.
And you might end up in a situation where it's like, okay, cool, we took this building, right? And then someone says, then what? Now what?
Yeah.
And everyone looks at each other and goes, I don't know. And then that's the end of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Nebs, if I keep sending you invites, I'm sorry, I don't mean to. It's like if I touch my screen, I might touch it wrong, and it gives me people to invite, and I might be hitting those buttons.
No, keep sending Neb's invite. We need to make sure
Nebs has to come here.
Constantly remind just in case. All right. So now I'm going to read from the third section of this passage. 3. The theory of proletarian revolution. Lenin's theory of the proletarian revolution proceeds from 3 fundamental theses. First thesis: the domination of finance capital in the advanced capitalist countries, the issue of stocks and bonds as one of the principal operations of finance capital, the export of capital to the sources of raw materials, which is one of the foundations of imperialism, the omnipotence of a financial oligarchy, which is the result of the domination of finance capital, All this reveals the grossly parasitic character of monopolistic capitalism, makes the yoke of the capitalist trusts and syndicates 100 times more burdensome, intensifies the indignation of the working class with the foundations of capitalism, and brings the masses to the proletarian revolution as their only salvation. Hence the first conclusion: intensification of revolutionary crises within the capitalist countries and growth of the elements of an explosion on the internal proletarian front in the metropolises. So, one way out, because it's just going to keep getting worse. If we don't do it, it's going to keep getting worse.
Yes.
Excuse me. Second thesis: the increase in the export of capital to the colonies and dependent countries, the expansion of spheres of influence, which we've all heard a million times, especially recently.
Yeah.
Colonial possessions until they cover the whole globe. The transformation of capitalism into a world system of financial enslavement and colonial oppression of the vast majority of the population of the world by a handful of advanced countries. And he put that in quotes, advanced countries.
Yeah.
All this has, on the one hand, converted the separate national economies and national territories into links in a single chain called world economy. And, on the other hand, split the population of the globe into two camps. A handful of advanced capitalist countries which exploit and oppress vast colonies and dependencies, and the huge majority consisting of colonial and dependent countries which are compelled to wage a struggle for liberation from the imperialist yoke. Hence, the second conclusion: intensification of the revolutionary crisis in the colonial countries, and growth of the elements of revolt against imperialism on the external colonial front. So we constantly see that, right?
Yeah.
Think like New Caledonia, for instance, comes to mind right now. Obviously, Palestinian crises, Congo, Sudan. Keep on going. Third thesis: the monopolistic possession of spheres of influence and colonies, the uneven development of the capitalist countries, leading to a frenzied struggle for the redivision of the world between countries which have already seized territories and those claiming their share. Imperialist wars as the only means of restoring the disturbed equilibrium. All this leads to the intensification of the struggle on the third front, the intercapitalist front, which weakens imperialism and facilitates the union of the first two fronts against imperialism: the front of the revolutionary proletariat and the front of colonial emancipation. Hence the third conclusion: that under imperialism, wars cannot be averted, and that a coalition between the proletarian revolution in Europe and the colonial revolution in the East in a united world front of revolution against the world front of imperialism is inevitable.
Yeah. And one reason why it's inevitable, one reason why war under imperialism is inevitable is the capitalists love making their money in the war machines, in the mech and stuff like that. So that's been going on for...
Yeah, it's a means to an end, right? Like if you have this imperialist conflict, you either win and gain the sphere of influence over the territory that you're trying to get, or just straight up control of said territory.
Yeah.
Or you lose and you lose that, and that's not great. But you're both making money from the war effort.
Yep.
So no matter what, someone's making money.
Yeah. So I mean, this was important because this was the distinction of Lenin, and like you said that before you started reading, that this showed the difference, like why it's now Marxist Leninism and what Lenin added to it, because Marx was looking during when industrialization was still going on, and then the imperial wars were starting, and that was the worldview that Lenin had. So it had to be, it had to be added on, because there was this new development in capitalism that really Marx didn't like talk as much about, he knew that it was going to come to this decay and stuff like that, but I don't know if he understood like the imperialism and then the following fascism that came.
Yeah, Marx was right in his theory in the stages as capitalism, like it had been around for a little bit, but it was still relatively new and developing. Yeah. Whereas by the time Lenin was there, it had developed.
Yeah.
And like you said, the industrialization periods were in full force and the imperialistic periods were beginning in full force. And like now we see ourselves in sort of almost a post-industrial period where new theories are being developed and addressed.
Yeah. So let's move on to I put these two categories. You gave me two different categories, but I kind of threw them together. It's bringing Soviets to power and advancing conditions for the people. And so what do you have? What do you want to talk about under that?
So one thing I see in particular when people are talking about like, we'll get into criticisms and stuff later. But when people are kind of talking about like, the Soviet Union didn't do this, they could have done this. And they often forget what state Russia was in when the Bolsheviks first took power.
Yeah.
You have to remember that they were semi-feudal. Mm-hmm. And relatively out of date. Even like the rest of Europe looked at them, they're like, what is happening? The majority of people were living on farms. There was conditions were not great, and Russia, even at the time, was not even really electrified. Like, really put that into perspective. Like, electricity hadn't really been developed across the society yet. So, I think what we would talk about is the development of the 5-year plans.
Yeah,
that Stalin had.
Yep.
So we have here. Beginning in 1928, focused on industrialization and collectivizing agriculture to transform the Soviet Union from an agrarian society into an industrial and military superpower. The first plan also expanded heavy industry, such as steel production, energy generation, and fuel extraction. So rapidly modernized Russia and very quickly started outpacing the rest of the world. Like, I remember a long time ago, I had seen this chart. I wish I had thought about it. I probably could have found it before this. But there was this chart where it showed, like, here's America, France, and England. And then you see Russia and the Soviet Union suddenly doing this, and then they're just way off the chart.
Yeah, no, they definitely grew really fast. And China did as well when they went.
They had different strategies on how to industrialize, but they both industrialized rapidly.
Yeah. What I wanted to add to this was, he provided free healthcare and education, and the education was, very important because there was places that had no schooling, had their literacy rates were so low that you had. When Lenin was going around, he was actually reading to people. He was teaching them to read for Marx. Like, he was taking Marx and helping them. That his wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, was up until the end of the Soviets, there was a literary award in her name because she had taught so many children, like not just children, but so many people to read. You know what I mean? So
reading wasn't like the most common thing that people do.
Yeah.
Like, we kind of take it for granted here in the West. But like, that just wasn't super common.
We take it for granted, but we don't push people reading beyond a certain level. But, literacy is highly important for the people, so when you're looking at literacy rates, does our government care that we're like 125th now in literacy rate or something like we're at an amazing low amount, and everyone else, like so many places are doing so much better. Places that we complain about all the time are doing so much better in literacy than we are. No, they don't care because they want us to be ignorant of what's going on. They don't want us to be able to logically, look at their propaganda and get through it and be like, yeah, that's not happening. Because go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem. It's just, I think that stuff is important. And then, do you want to read I can explain this a little bit. So this is actually from the CIA files. And I just pulled this because it kind of proves that, like why the CIA was going, at Stalin, in some ways. So, do you want to read what this says here?
Stalin was scary. Okay? Scary. Scary. So, hold on, I'm losing my place here. I found it. Stalin's propaganda is directed toward the betterment of the downtrodden peoples of the world. Therefore, concludes the author, while it was easy to stir up hate against a dictator such as Hitler, because his very pronouncements predicated the enslavement of other peoples, this is not so in the case of Stalin, whose promises are more for liberty and the raising of the standard of living for the poor.
Yeah. So basically, this was this guy, Juan Bosch, who was a Dominican exile author, writing on Stalin, and the piece was called The Useless Sowing of Hate Against Stalin, and it was written in 1950. And, what he's saying, and it was important enough for the CIA to make this notation on it. So, him saying that it's kind of useless because the people liked him. He was doing well by his people. He was helping the poor. He was helping people. So, that just, there's so much of that, we are propagandized that, he was so cruel to his people. He wasn't. He was a good leader for them. Most of them really liked him. So,
and the CIA is sitting there, they're like, fuck, how do we get people to hate this guy? We need the people to hate this guy, but everyone loves him because he's doing all this great stuff. And, before we get to the next part, I'll add in there, it's like, that's why we hate Trotsky. So
yeah, Trotsky too. I know Trotsky, gave the CIA
doing his thing, and they're like, "Thank God,
yeah.
now we have something to work with."
Yeah. So, so the next section we're going to talk about is World War II and what he did. We basically know the lives that were lost to the Soviets, but. He was there. He was leading them. Like he wasn't, in one thing, like Hitler was not doing that. Hitler was removed from it, he was an actual, general, like going out there and really planning, what was happening and stuff like that. But what else do you have to say on those?
Like, for comparison, Stalin's out there, like you said, he's talking with the generals, he's planning with the generals. He's like, here's what we're going to do. Tell me what you need. We're going to do this. And motivating the people as well. Hitler's, in a bunker or at his, nest? Whatever that thing was called.
Yeah, I know, but yeah.
And they're like, he's swimming around, he's hiding, and the generals are like, hey, we're thinking about this. He's like, nah, just kill him. It's fine. Just do it. And that's it. Like, no. And that's the difference between a leader that's genuinely motivated to protect and defend his people.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, no, I'm just like, without Stalin, I don't know what would have happened in World War II. I think, I don't know.
Even with all the preparations that they had made, they still got pretty decimated at the beginning. Operation Barbarossa, like anyone would have been distraught. And, there's a famous picture of Stalin, like, being told that the Germans had invaded. And there was a moment there where he's like, fuck. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they pulled together, and through the Soviet economy that had been built, and careful planning, and the command economy that they took over, they were able to push that back. Not only push it back, but start reclaiming people's lands and getting Germany back into Germany.
Yeah, Chico. They did lose a lot in the end too, but they were also fight. There's a difference too of fighting for something you believe in, where a lot of the other, like, the Americans were fighting imperialist war. The Russians were trying to fight, to keep communism, to fight, you know what I mean? Like, they were trying to defend themselves.
So another way I would say that the Americans were fighting for that sphere of influence that Stalin was talking about.
Yeah.
The Soviets were fighting an existential threat.
Yes. Yep.
Two completely different motivations, which is why, there's some harsh policies that had to come about as a result of that. But when you're fighting for full-blown survival, you're going to do what you need to do.
Exactly. All right, let's move on to some of the answers to the critiques. The first one is that he was a dictator. So how about you read from that CIA file? Yeah,
so you want me to read that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I got it. And just to reiterate, this is from the CIA archives. Even in Stalin's time, there was collective leadership. The Western idea of a dictator within the communist setup is exaggerated. Misunderstandings on that subject are caused by a lack of comprehension of the real nature and organization of the communist power structure. Stalin, although holding wide powers, was merely the captain of a team, and it seems obvious that Khrushchev will be the new captain. However, it does not appear that any of the present leaders will rise to the stature of Lenin or Stalin, so that it will be safer to assume that development in Moscow will be along the lines of what is called collective leadership, unless Western policies force the Soviets to streamline their power organization. The present situation is the most favorable from the point of view of upsetting the communist dictatorship since the death of Stalin.
I do like how they say he's not a dictator and then say communist dictatorship. So what do
they mean by dictatorship?
Communist dictatorship, the dictatorship of the proletariat. They're against workers. That's exactly what they're saying right there. They know exactly what they're saying because they know what the communist dictatorship is.
Yeah. They're familiar. They read that stuff. They have to. If they don't understand their enemy, then they can't fight it properly. And to the bourgeoisie, Stalin was a dictator because he wouldn't let them do whatever they wanted to do. He was on the side of the worker. He was for the worker.
Yep. So I want to read something from Anna Louise Strong, who happened to be a journalist who actually had been in Russia at the time that Stalin was elected leader. So this is about the new constitution. Stalin's great moment when he first appeared as leader of the whole Soviet people was when as chairman of the Constitutional Commission, he presented the new constitution of the socialist state. The commission of 31 of the country's most able historians, economists, and political scientists had been instructed to create the world's most democratic constitution with the most accurate machinery yet devised for obtaining the will of the people. They spent a year and a half in detailed study of every past constitution in the world, not only of the governments, but of trade unions and voluntary societies. The draft that they prepared was then discussed by the Soviet people for several months in more than 500,000 meetings attended by 36.5 million people. That's how you do it, people. The number of suggested amendments that reached the Constitutional Commission from the popular discussions was 154,000. Stalin himself is known to have read tens of thousands of these people's letters. He goes on, she explains how when he addressed the Congress, and there was people there because it was open to people to come into the Congress, but it was also being, on radios and all that at the time. Stalin said that each of these, like, we have all these, and we're really going to answer them. Like, we're going to try to fit everyone's concerns. 154,000 suggestions. Mm-hmm. They're going to try to, fit it into this Constitution. So that is someone that's listening to the people. That is, that is not a dictator.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we proved against the dictatorship. So,
I feel like we can still do more. It's like, Stalin did a lot of, it's like, no, that's all the proof you really need. Like, yeah. Enemies and friends alike are just like, he's not a dictator. Like, he didn't have that kind of power.
Yeah. And you had other journalists going there at the time and coming back. You had, there was a professor that went there. I saw the New York Times, like this Professor Ward, he went there and he came back and said it's not a dictatorship. There was plenty of people that went and observed elections and stuff like that from the West that said it's not. So I don't know. All right. So the next criticism was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. One of
the most, common ones that pops up, right?
Yeah.
Which I'll add, it's like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, I believe the Germans also had used another name, which was like the Soviet-German friendship or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Like they made it seem like, it's like, oh yeah, we're good buddies now. See?
Yeah.
And that's really just a tactic to, belittle the Soviet Union. and for the workers of the rest of these countries to go, oh well, the Soviet Union, that ain't nothing. Communism is stupid. That's all it is.
Yeah, and and it was also like the Soviets had tried to do treaties with the West to try to,
they tried to make anti-fascist alliances.
Yeah,
and it's like let's talk to the liberals and say like, hey, I know fascism might be appealing to you, but it's actually they're going to kill you. So like, hey, maybe we should work together.
Yeah. And the treaty, like you can look, there's a list of treaties that Hitler had with UK, France, Poland, Lithuania, Romania, Denmark.
I'm going to take a second. I'm going to spout all of them off.
Okay.
We've got the list right here, so I'm just gonna read every treaty that was signed with Hitler real quick. 1933, UK, France, and Italy. 1934, Poland. Later in 1944, so first one was in January, this one's in March. Poland again. 1935 with the UK. 1936 with Japan. 1938 with the UK in September. 1938 with France in December. 1939 with Lithuania. 1939 with Romania, 1939 with Denmark, 1939 with Italy again, 1939 with Estonia, 39 with Latvia, 1939 with the USSR. This one was in August, and that's the one we're talking about. That's the official name is the Non-Aggression Pact, and it's just both sides going, hey, I'm not going to shoot you, you don't shoot me. Cool?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And I want to, one other thing that I just want to bring up is, they were trying to do so much with Poland, but basically you had the diplomat from Poland telling Hitler, and this is before the final solution thing. This is when he was just talking about moving all the Jewish peoples to Africa, as the plan before. So this guy Lipsky actually says to Hitler, if you do this, the Polish people would erect a monument to you. Like, I mean, that is what the Russians were dealing with. Like, they needed Poland to be the buffer, and they weren't even going to be a buffer either.
It wasn't going to work out.
And do you want to read this one Truman quote?
Yes. So I'm going to read the whole thing, even the non-highlighted part here. So on June 22nd came the stunning news that Hitler had turned and attacked Russia along the 1,800-mile front. Asked what he thought of the colossal turn of events, Truman spoke his mind in a way no one could fail to understand, and that would not be soon forgotten. If we see that Germany is winning, we ought to help Russia. And if Russia is winning, we ought to help Germany. In that way, let them kill as many as possible. Although I don't want to see Hitler victorious under any circumstance.
Yeah. So that was the thoughts from the West. Like, that is what they thought of. You know, they didn't care. They didn't care for the Soviets, so they weren't going to sign these treaties with them. And the Soviets needed to protect themselves, and hence a pact with Hitler.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So
I do want to add one other thing. One of the things that comes up a lot with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is they'll insult the Soviet Union, or they're like, oh, when people talk about it, they'll be like, Stalin was so stupid. You know, why would you sign a non-aggression pact with Hitler? They knew that something was coming. They knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
There's a book by Anna Louise Strong called The Soviets Expected It.
Yeah.
So add that to your reading list, everybody. They weren't, him and the rest of the Soviets weren't dumb. They knew something was coming, and they were trying to buy themselves time.
Yeah, so Worker Tenant is saying Mustache Man published plans for invading Ukraine in 1934 in Hearst Press, which I believe. Mm-hmm. Ash is asking about the parade. I'm not entirely. I don't know. I'll have to talk to her about that.
I'm not familiar with the parade.
I'm not sure exactly what.
I mean, it could be something I've heard of before, and maybe I just hadn't heard of it that way. But I can't say I'm too familiar with that.
Yeah. It's a Praxben talking point. Okay, I'll look into it, Ash. What he's talking about, then whatever. Okay, the last critique we're gonna kind of go over is the big spoon.
I don't have a spoon. I have a fork, but you get the same concept.
Yep.
Stalin personally. This one's simple. Stalin personally went into the southern parts of Russia, the parts of Poland, and the entirety of Ukraine, and just personally ate all the grain.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened. So,
you turned it into Lucky
Charms. We're done. No.
That's the end of it,
What I want to bring up is this all came, so the 1930s, this anti-communist politics, it really began probably around World War I, the anti-communist politics of the West. It just, it was just going from there. So when this happened, it was the Ukrainian Nazis basically that created this myth. And they created it pretty much right away. So we're talking about a famine that happened in 33 to 34, 32, 33, something.
33 to 34 would be the official date of when this stuff happened. So the thing is back then famines were happening all the time. Mm-hmm. All the time. In the 20s, in that same region, there was 4 famines alone in the 20s. The region is extremely susceptible to drought.
Yes. Yeah. So that prompted the collectivization, that they use that against, the collectivization, caused this. But what was actually happening was, they're going from small agricultural farms which cannot be maintained, which were historically from going back 1,000 years when they started looking at it, there would be these famines every few years, like 4 to 5 years, they would have a famine. And in this region, lots of places in the world because of that, but like in this region, they constantly were having famines. And this, they used this particular one was, it's the last, except for there was kind of a famine that happened like right after the end of the war and stuff in the 40s or during the war.
There was a major famine during the war for, obvious reasons.
Yeah. So,
and then there was a one afterwards during the recovery period.
Okay. Yeah. So, now that he was moving it to large scale agriculture, and now there hasn't been a famine in what, 7 to 80 years now,
60 years probably.
Yeah.
And let's also, like during the period, right? So 33 to 34, there was this famous event around the same time called the Great Depression in the United States. There was the Dust Bowl caused by poor agricultural practices that were happening. That caused a bit of a famine too. We don't hear about it as much, and like I don't think the death toll was nearly as high. But the period around the world, there were famines happening. China had famines all the time, and just like China, they had, with the collectivization efforts, they had the Bengal famine, which Stalin sent food to. He sent wheat to take care of the Bengal famine, and the Bengal famine was directly caused by the UK, purposefully. And with these areas, with socialist areas that had experienced famines in the past, they kind of go through one last great famine as they start collectivizing.
Yeah.
And then they don't experience it again, except for extenuating circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so we went through some of the critiques, the dictatorship, the famines, the Molotov-Ribbentrop. I mean, there's a few more, but it's always, we all have to consider there's not the great man in history and the evil man in history. There's just people trying to do their best, trying to do their best. And like when it comes down to someone and they're actually helping their people and the people like them, like self-determination people, like we didn't need to be putting out this propaganda against them. They weren't being aggressive. They had the Soviets, and they weren't being aggressive to like being imperialistic and going out and trying to get other places and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else to say before we?
I was going to say, it's like the Soviets, they weren't like trying to export revolution or anything like that. They didn't believe in that. But all this propaganda and hate towards them, and Stalin in particular, came from the growing communist movements that were happening in what we would consider first world countries, right?
Yeah.
And the threat was less so that the Soviet Union was going to do something, and more so that their own people were going to do something, using the Soviet Union as an example. So they had to thwart that. And like Stalin had said, and had quoted Lenin, they're not going to go down. They're not just going to give it up. It's a constant struggle.
All right. So the things that we read from today, we read from Dialectical and Historical Materialism. All these things can be found on Marxist.org. We read the Wells and Stalin interview, which you can find up there. And we read his Foundations of Leninism, or from that. We didn't read the whole thing, of course.
Wait, I was looking at it. I was like, This is very long.
And so there was your suggested reading was the Anna Louise Strong book. She was someone. Yeah, I actually think what I read was from that book, actually.
I was thinking it was. I wasn't 100%, so I just wanted to bring it up separately, just in case.
Yeah. I didn't bring it up, and then I wanted to mention some of his earlier works to read. I know it's been brought up in Riyadh before, and we actually have read it. It's Anarchism or Socialism. He wrote that in 1906. And also in 1913, he does one of his bigger pieces about Marxism and the national question. So you can read that, probably debunk some of the ACP if you need to. And I want to mention that the other project I do is historically. So that's historic. .ly is it. I'm a producer for basically the shows and stuff like that, but I've helped with the podcasts and stuff like that too. So on historically.com, you can find the interview with Grover Furr. He's a professor who writes a lot on the Soviets and favorably. So he's, deemed as being, I don't know. The United States kind of deems it as, not really being all there, but no, he actually knows what he's talking about. So Grover Furr, you can check out that interview on Historically. And one other thing I want to mention, because we did have the dialectical and historical materialism, is that we have the episode on Historically. It was actually our late nights with Lenin when we were reading Lenin and stuff. This was one of the only, there was a couple episodes we did not read Lenin on. And the one episode we did with Booker Omole, who is, he's I don't know if he's deputy chairman or if he's chairman, but he's up there in the Kenyan Communist Party. So he actually reads dialectical and historical materialism for us and discusses it with us and goes through it. So if you want to check it out that way, if that's how you want to listen to it, go ahead, and you can find that on the Historically stuff. So I just wanted to bring that there. And I want to also thank Cruz for coming up for our first Ghosts of the Revolution. So
I like this segment. It's a good segment.
Yeah, I think it's nice to look at just the separate people. One of the things I wanted to get into, how I thought about this, is that we're reading Bukharin, and I taught, I asked Cutie about what's, what are the issues with Bukharin, and I kind of knew them, but he explained, what happened there with Stalin and Bukharin, but he did write some really important pieces. Mm-hmm. So there is the thing about being able to, sometimes you can get some good information, not be 100 on the revolutionary that's writing it. I know, Larry loves Hoja and stuff like that, but I know
they're just people. At the end of the day, they had great positions of power, and had, I don't want to even say power, just they had a lot of influence.
Yeah. But,
they're just people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, some of them did bad, some of them did good. I mean, I like Rosa Luxemburg, and, London complained about some of her stuff. So,
and Rosa complained about Lenin stuff, but they were friends.
Yeah.
He liked her cat.
Everyone, but
her cat had a spell over Lenin.
All right. So I guess that concludes, except for I should do some others. So we will, for right now, we may move, when I do the segment, we may move it to later, only because our art director wants to do this as a nighttime thing. So we may move it every other week and maybe a little bit later on Wednesday. But Aria will be doing her every other Wednesday starting next Wednesday. They'll be doing their theme-based collective Riyadhs, and having a panel. I might be up in that panel someday. You never know. And So what I am doing here is just like probably a one-on-one. If two people want to come up and discuss a person too, that's fine. But really just focus on the, the individuals and, the good, the stuff that they did. And maybe there's some stuff that's not great, but, why we should read these people and stuff like that. Friday night, we will definitely be having a show at 8 o'clock on YouTube. Ivan will probably stream it here again. But we do need people over to be watching the YouTube stuff. We need some hours in there. So if you do jump over there at least for a little bit. And I don't know, for those of you that are in the server, we're having book club tonight. Mm-hmm. Chapter 4 of ABC of Communism.
And I have one last thought.
Okay.
If you still just really don't like Stalin, right? I have some good news. He's dead.
Yeah.
It's okay. You can read his stuff. You don't have to like him.
Yep. Right? And just know that Stalin is Nelson's dad and the spoon is his mom.
Right.
Nelson was conceived by Stalin and the spoon. Nelson
is actually in his 70s.
Nelson is the grain. He's the hoarded grain. All right. Good night, everyone. I'll probably see some of you later. So bye. Thank you for coming.
Bye.